Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs. Now, Naked Lunch was first published in 1959, and this is probably Burroughs' most famous work. Now, William S. Burroughs is one of the primary writers of the Beat generation, along with people like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. Now, the Beat generation was a literary movement that really came to prominence in the 1950s, and this movement really sort of embraced the counterculture and, in a lot of ways, informed the hippie movement of the 1960s. Now, I'm not as well versed in the Beat generation as a lot of other people are. I'm certainly familiar with it from my English classes in college, and I do own a copy of Jack Kerouac's On the Road, which my friend Matt highly recommended to me. But I'm really not as well versed in it as I probably should be. Now, Burroughs was a huge drug addict for a significant period of his life, and from what I understand, he completed this book after he got treatment for his drug addiction. Now, I believe Burroughs wrote much of this when he was living in Tangier, Morocco, and I think it was Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac who really helped him put this book together from assorted writings that he did. Because the book is really a collection of loosely connected vignettes, and according to Burroughs, you could read them in any order. Now, Naked Lunch is honestly a pretty hard book to describe, and I liked the book, don't get me wrong, but it's not the easiest book to comprehend, and in a way that's both a positive and a negative about the book. Because I think that was definitely intentional, but I can understand why somebody would not like this book. And this is certainly not a book for everybody, but not for nothing, not everything should be. And if you're a reader, you should challenge yourself every once in a while. You might not end up liking what you read, but you should read more challenging books every once in a while. And Naked Lunch is certainly a challenging book, and I totally understand why somebody would not like this. And even as somebody who liked the book, I'm not going to pretend I understood every little thing about it. And it's such a hard book to describe. Now, I've heard it described as a science fiction novel, and I guess if you're taking what's happening in the book literally, then it would be science fiction. Like, much of the book takes place in this place in Tangier called the Interzone, which is based on a real place, but the way Burroughs describes it in the novel, he makes it sound like it's some other dimension that the main character is traveling into, or some other plane of existence. You have these creatures in the book called Mugwumps. There's talk about giant insects from another galaxy. There's a part in this book about these giant aquatic centipedes that, if grinded up, can be highly addictive, which, as far as I know, don't exist. There's also a part in this book where a character releases all these insects at a party, and if you get bitten by these insects, you absolutely have to have sex after getting bitten, otherwise you'll die, so this causes like a massive orgy. So, if you're taking a lot of this stuff literally, then yes, it would be science fiction, but I'm not 100% sure how literally you're supposed to take all that stuff. It seems like much of that is in the main character's head, and really the book is sort of a series of hallucinations that the main character's having. And the book really does not have a set plot line. The best way I could describe it is it follows a character named William Lee, which is actually the pseudonym that Burroughs wrote his first novel, Junkie, under, so it's clear the main character is meant to be a stand-in for William Burroughs himself. And the book follows Lee as he travels from New York City to Mexico to Tangier, and he encounters all these strange creatures and characters. Some of these could be real, and some of them could just be hallucinations. There are points where he encounters a sadistic doctor named Benway, who is sort of the villain of the piece. That's the best way I could describe the plot of Naked Lunch, because really there is no plot. As I said before, it's really a collection of loosely connected vignettes, but even if you read the vignettes as standalones, they don't really make a whole lot of sense, and I'm not necessarily saying that as a bad thing. Sorry about the dramatic change in lighting, but Naked Lunch is in a lot of ways a book about addiction, especially if you interpret the book as being a series of hallucinations from a man going through heroin withdrawals. But it's not just about drug addiction, it's also about how you could get addicted to sex, and it's about how you can get addicted to power. Like, a lot of the villainous characters in Naked Lunch are absolutely addicted to the power they have over other people, and the pain that they inflict on other people. There's a lot of stuff in this book that's sort of satirizing capital punishment and police corruption and fascism. So while it is in a lot of ways a nonsensical book, there is actually a lot being said here. It's also a very disturbing book. There's some graphic imagery in this novel. There's rape, there's pedophilia, like, there's a scene in the book where there's this orgy, and it describes this young boy being brutally raped by a mugwump and then murdered. But while it is a violent and disturbing book, Naked Lunch is also a freaking hilarious book as well. There's some stuff in this book that honestly is very funny. Like, the character of Dr. Benway, even though he is sort of the villain of the novel, he's a freaking hilarious character, just because some of the things he says in this book and some of the things he does are just so absurd. One example of a really funny scene in the book, and when I say funny, I mean darkly funny, because in real life this would be horrible. But there's a scene in this book where it describes a character who's a chauffeur, and at one point he runs down a pregnant woman in the street, and then she miscarries and gets the blood and her dead baby all over the road, and then the police come and arrest her for violating the sanitation code. Like, the book has a lot of absurd shit like that. And you really can't put the book in any one particular genre. It is sort of a novel about addiction, but it's also kind of a science fiction novel, depending on whether or not you want to take the events of the book literally. It can be seen as a black comedy or a satire. There are even some horror elements in this, and it's very much a surrealist novel. This is definitely an example of surrealist fiction. But I recommend Naked Lunch, but I only recommend it for a specific kind of reader. This is certainly not a book for everybody, and it's also not the easiest book to comprehend. And even though I liked the book, I'm not going to pretend I understood every single thing about it, but I dug it. Now, this book was extremely controversial when it was first published, and was actually banned in Boston and Los Angeles. And this edition of Naked Lunch actually comes with the transcript for the Supreme Court hearing where they actually tried to see if they could get the book declared legally obscene, and you had people like Allen Ginsberg and Norman Mailer coming to the defense of the book. Basically, they argued that despite its content, the book still has social relevance, and personally, I think it's ridiculous that they tried to get this book banned. Yes, the book is vile in a lot of ways, but it still doesn't deserve to be banned. Like, I don't like censorship in any form. Now, in the 80s, Burroughs published a collection of short stories called Interzone, and I believe Dr. Benway showed up in one of the stories in that collection. This novel has also had a pretty significant impact on pop culture. For example, the band Steely Dan actually got their name from this book, because Steely Dan is actually the name of a dildo in the novel. Now, at a certain point in the 1960s, frequent Burroughs collaborator Anthony Balch, if I'm saying his last name right, tried to do a musical based on this book, and apparently he wanted Mick Jagger to play the William Lee role. But he ended up dropping out, and at a certain point Dennis Hopper and Chuck Barris were considered for the role, but ultimately this project ended up falling through. But we did end up getting an adaptation of Naked Lunch in 1991 from David Cronenberg. Now, David Cronenberg, for his adaptation of Naked Lunch, he took what was a very non-linear story, and he made it as straightforward as possible. The movie actually does have a straightforward narrative, as opposed to the book. And the movie is not a literal adaptation of the book, rather it's more of a tribute to the book, and a tribute to Burroughs' work in general, while also taking elements from his life. For example, the Bill Lee character at one point accidentally kills his wife, and that's something that actually happened to William S. Burroughs in real life. You also have two characters in the movie who are clearly based on Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. But it's honestly a really good movie. It has Peter Weller, who most people might recognize as Alex Murphy or RoboCop as the character of Bill Lee, who is the William Burroughs stand-in. It also has Judy Davis in a dual role. Ian Holm also has a small role in the movie, and so does Julian Sands. But the actor who really stole the movie was Roy Scheider as Benway, who has probably the funniest scene in the movie at the end where he bursts out of a woman's suit and just screams, "Benway!" That scene, actually, it doesn't make any sense in context, but it's still freaking hilarious. And the effects work in the movie is also really well done, from the Mugwumps to these typewriters that turn into giant beetles. The movie Naked Lunch was also made fun of on The Simpsons, where Bart, Nelson, and Milhouse go to see the movie, and then when they're walking out, Nelson says, "I can think of 2 things wrong with that title." But it's a really good movie. It's not a straight adaptation of the book, but if you've read the book, then you'll know to do a straight adaptation would be kind of impossible. But yeah, that was my review on Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs, and bye.